Welcome, everyone, to the June episode of Rainbow Inspirations. I'm here with a kindred spirit today, Barbara Turner, a friend and ally. And we do Rainbow Inspirations because we believe that our stories are important, especially the stories of people who have a well lived life and identify as LGBTQ. So we curate these stories every month as part of Generation Plus's work with Blue Ridge Pride. And it's such a gift to me to meet people like Barbara Turner. And I'm going to initiate today's conversation with Barbara by asking her a question about a theme in her life. Barbara, if there were a phrase or a word that would describe your spiritual journey, what would that be?
I'm not sure. Um,
How about the one you just
Gradual deep.
go ahead.
Okay. I thought I was deep. I lost faith for 30 years. And then in coming back, the faith grew progressively deeper very rapidly.
I feel that when you say it. Yeah, what kind of really inspired and impressed me about you was this weaving of science and spirituality in the way that you have worked in both fields, with a PhD in neuroscience, but also having, started part of your life in a convent and then going through rabbinical studies. So there's this weaving and so right now it sounds like you are in a place with some depth. And what Go ahead, say more.
Oh, I could not have imagined my life now.
Huh?
I thought everything that I was any doing was done when I came to a retirement community. Ha! I walked in the door essentially. First day I was here, met the director of ministries, and he asked for my background. And I told him I had rabbinic training. And he said, "Oh, we have." And I said, "I didn't. I got kicked out just before ordination." And he said, "Never mind that. We have a resident rabbi. It's yours." And we have about
Wow.
over 700 where I live.
So has this been
It is a product. It's a Methodist community.
how does your spiritual leadership show up in the community that you're in now?
Oh, I lead services.
Mhm.
Um, I do, if there isn't COVID, I do chaplaincy um, for the Jewish community and anyone else that I feel would be open. Um, and we have a healthcare center, so I go up there also.
Wow, there's so much right there, but I want to move now to going backwards to the beginning of your life and, just start with where you were raised and what kind of environment you grew up in.
Oh, I was raised in Southern California, in the Los Angeles area. I went to Catholic elementary school and including primary, kindergarten. Um, Went to a different Catholic school, high school, at my insistence, um, across town in Hollywood, which was much more open.
And what was your family like?
Um, I was a late in life child. My mother was 43 when she had me, my father, 48. My brothers were 23 and 18 years older than me, both in the service during World War II when I was born.
How do you think that affected you being born late in life to your parents?
I got coddled, I think. My father was not the stern, demanding father that my two brothers knew.
Mm.
He was gentle, storytelling, showing me off, taking me to baseball games, for walks in the park, playing golf with him. I mean, this is even starting age 5, 6, would take me to pony rides. This was not the father that my brothers knew, who had them working in his store from the time they were 6 years old and demanding.
So it was
Oh, they kind of resented the treatment I got.
yeah.
I
It
was never
affect
close. I was never really close to either of them.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, we had a relationship, but I think that was always in the background
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
the treatment was so different.
Mhm. Mhm. And, so your early days, you went to the Catholic school, so your family was Catholic, and
My father was actually nominally Jewish,
oh,
but coming from Hungary. But his father came over. Um, they took all the eligible males in a coal mining town to Pennsylvania to a coal mining town,
mhm,
and so he grew up coal mining. His mother, and so there was no Jewish woman for my father to marry.
uh-huh,
So, and I think he thought that that would not be good for business. He was very financially oriented.
okay.
So he's kind of squashed that and demanded that my Baptist mother convert to Catholicism for marriage.
Wow. So really neither of your parents were Catholic, but you did end up
And
converted.
my mother actually totally embraced.
Okay. Yeah.
My
Okay.
father, not so much, but demanded that that we all go to church every Sunday.
Hmm. And what was your spiritual life like then as a youth?
Um, Following the rules.
Mhm.
Um, I tried for an interior life, but not so much. It was mostly rule following, external.
Wow. And so when did that transition for you s- spiritually from rule following to something else?
At the time of my divorce, the announcement that he was going to divorce me, that started a process that was at first just trying to keep myself in one piece. But 6, 9 months later, another process of opening and deepening started.
Mm. Yeah, so you used the quote before we started this conversation about the cracks are where the light
Yeah.
gets in. And so tell us more about that formative relationship and when you met your first
And
spouse and
only, yeah.
okay.
Um, in a kind of a snack cafeteria on the top floor of the hospital uh, in at UCLA Medical Center.
Okay, so were you a student at UCLA then at that time?
Yes, and my husband was doing a postdoc,
Okay. What were you studying at UCLA?
the neuroscience.
Okay, so you were studying neuroscience at UCLA and you met your husband, your first and only, and then how long were you married? What was that
A
relationship
little over
like?
30 years.
Wow. Yeah.
And see, I was pretty good at suppressing. Um, from the time I was little, my mother worried, and I understood this only later, of course, that I was hanging out with tomboys
Mm,
and played with the boys just as much as I did with the girls as 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 a 5, 6, 7. Um, and there were classmates that she did not want me to associate with,
mm.
and I could never understand why. And I do now.
And so what was that all about?
That was all about. She was afraid I would she was afraid that I might be gay.
Mhm. And so you were repressing that from then on, those feelings, because subconsciously you knew that your mother was stressed about that, you think?
Um, no, I just wondered about it.
Okay.
Um, Later on, I acknowledged them, but they were not overwhelming, if you
Mhm.
will.
Mhm. Mhm.
And they would not have been accepted with my friends. And I suspect that had something to do with it too. I did
Mhm.
have, not until I got to college, the first year of college, did I meet a woman uh, who was lesbian.
Okay. So you were kind of like introduced into that world in your first year of college.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
but
And
she had someone that she was going with at the time. That we did not have a relationship, that kind of relationship.
so you followed the path and you met your husband and you were married for 30 years.
Yeah, but don't. Yeah, okay. So I then entered the convent of that order, and
Okay.
I was teaching as a nun for the 10 years.
Okay.
Birth control encyclical came out, and after having taught in the barrio in Los Angeles and understanding the desperation of those mothers, it seemed absolutely inhumane and illogical to demand that no birth control be used. And I could not just ignore it because I was expected to teach that,
Mm. Mm.
and I could not.
Okay. So how old were you at that time? Do you remember
About
approximately?
29.
Okay. So is that when you left
Hmm.
the convent and you stopped that whole path and then you went to UCLA?
Yes.
Okay. What was it that made you decide to look to study neuroscience? That would be unusual for a woman at that time, it seems.
I read an article in Scientific American on the pineal gland,
Hmm,
and I
interesting.
was fascinated. You ask, I tell you.
Yeah.
So I followed through on that.
What was
They
it
did
about
not
the
want me. They did not want me at UCLA. They tried to keep telling me that this wasn't appropriate for a woman. And
wow.
I insisted.
You have a it seems like that's a theme of your life that you persist. Nevertheless, she persisted. You moved through some of those
Yeah.
um yeah, obstacles and resistance. So, what was it about the pineal gland that really interested you?
Um, how this little tiny thing, really tiny, could have such influence on the body in
Mm,
terms of sleep, diurnal rhythms, the whole thing.
wow.
And I did go into neuroendocrinology,
Wow. Wow.
but
So,
mostly sex effects
say more about that.
on behavior and function.
So you studied sex effects on behavioral
Yeah,
and function.
estrogen, testosterone.
Okay. Wow. What out of
My last project was on rheumatoid arthritis, looking
interesting.
at what happens in inflammation and are there estrogen receptors, testosterone receptors involved in that inflammation.
What did you find?
I believe there was, particularly
Uh-huh.
estrogen, but I had a student who did not follow my orders and inadvertently destroyed 2 years worth of work before I could publish.
Oh, wow. So if we were to Google Barbara Turner, would we find any of your work online?
Probably it's not much
Well, I'm so glad we're talking to you now so we can learn more about your path and these
because
areas
it's
of
too
interest.
long ago. I think you'd be really digging to find it.
Well, let's try it. Okay, so you went to school for neuroscience, and then you started to study the integration of neuroscience and endocrinology. And somewhere in that path, you met your husband, and you were together for 30 years. What was
Right.
your marriage like?
At first, 2 years were good.
Uh-huh.
Um, I had two children. I had
Okay.
my son right away, and my daughter a couple of years later.
Okay.
Um, I do not think having children helped the marriage. He was very self oriented and used to having his way and being dictatorial.
So, how did that interplay with the following rules part of you and your spirituality?
I
Was there a
put up with it
relationship?
far too long.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so then you said when you really deepened in your spirituality was when that relationship ended.
Yes,
Say more about that. What happened?
it happened. Um, what really happened there, in addition to starting to, after about 6, 7 months after the announcement, starting to go to the local synagogue, was the retreats that I went on. I
Hmm.
went on some amazing retreats, and some of them were at the Shalom Center in upstate New York, Falls Village, and they were focused on sexuality. And they also, my time there opened me up to who I was sexually.
Wow. So there was an acceptance at those retreat centers.
Oh no, it was everybody there was
Oh,
LGBTQ.
it was an LGBTQ retreat center?
Oh yeah,
Oh. What made you decide to go to an LGBTQ retreat center? You must have had, this is when you came out to yourself then.
yeah. This was in the process of coming out.
Okay. Wow.
I
And
wanted, I wanted to explore it.
And how would you describe that chapter of exploration in your life?
It was a wonderful time, a
Hmm.
time of major growth, emotionally
Mhm.
as well as spiritually.
Mhm. Mhm. That sounds wonderful. And you describe a deepening to your spirituality.
And I also went on religious retreats,
Mhm.
various ones.
So both LGBTQ and religious retreats.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. What did the deepening look like for you? How did it evolve from being a rule following religious or spiritual experience to something else? What was the next stage?
The long view, it doesn't happen overnight, is understanding that the basis of who you are is the presence of God within you, not your ego, not this thing that you've got to do, or the ego things in your life, objects, goals. That does not define you. It's your relationship with one, and being aware of his presence, or I don't want to gender this, the divine presence within.
Mm, feels good. Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing that message, and may it be received by all those who are watching us today. That wisdom that you've cultivated through your life experience and your spiritual experience. So I am just going to dive into the him and the his that we often use to reference God, source, our inner being, and I'm just curious about that and your experience with that through your kind of Judeo-Christian studies and how you reconcile that now. I know it's kind of a big question, but I'm
Oh,
curious.
it's not for me. It's no issue. Um, uh, Christianity in general uses the masculine for God,
Mhm.
and that's how it's in the Bible. It's always a he.
Mhm.
Um, my big awakening to the fact that maybe this is not the best way to do it was at while I was close to finishing rabbinic school. Um, I I was told to lead the Lord's Prayer, that we were doing a memorial service as part of a retreat. And I was asked to lead the Lord's Prayer. And I led it as written with a he. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not. He leads me. After it was over, the dean came up to me and said, "Don't you ever do that again. You
Yikes.
do, and you're out of here.
Oh
We do
my
not,
goodness.
we do not gender God." That made an impression. I
Yeah,
had never thought about it. I thought I was safe just reading as written.
well, that is interesting, and it's recently come to me that there's sometimes there's a static quality to spirituality and religion that, like, it was written, it is what it is, and then there's more of the evolutionary quality of religion and spirituality, that it changes as we change, and that there's different ways of understanding it over time. Do you have any commentary on that, like both the scriptures and the traditions as they are and were versus and the evolution of the spiritual practices?
Many people read the Bible and see only the rules. I certainly did, both Old and New Testament. But there's much more there. It does go beyond rules. Um, and inviting intimacy.
Intimacy between.
God and the human being praying.
Mhm, mhm. Beautiful, thank you for that. It's a both and. It
It's a
is
both
both. Mhm,
and most religions and churches have unfortunately focused only on the rules.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. Well, I value this portion of our conversation. I also want to fill in some gaps in the timeline of your experience. And so, you were married to your husband for 30 years. And what was the work you were doing during that entire 30 years? Was that the neuroscience, endocrinology?
I was research and teaching at the
Okay.
medical school.
Okay. So you were in academia, steeped in it,
Yep.
and that's quite a rigorous, rule oriented system, would you say?
It, not it, medical school, personality driven. The personalities make the rules, and the rules change with different personalities running the show.
Okay. And what was your role in that hierarchy of personalities?
Um,
If there was a hierarchy, but I'm assuming there was.
okay, yeah, dean of studies, chairman, blah blah. Um, I
And
I,
where
I
where,
sort
where did you fit in?
well, the faculty were fairly low on the totem pole there.
Mhm. 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 And how would you
You can argue with you you can bring things up with the dean. Sometimes that you're heard and action is taken, but you have no power. This is supplication or pointing out a deficit. You know, and as you go down the totem pole, I think your power increases, like with your department chair,
mhm.
with
Mhm.
usually depending on the personality.
And how were you able to make an impact during your tenure at UCLA? How do you see that now?
I think my major impact was by pure chance.
Hmm.
Um, well, I saw an injustice and I acted on it. The injustice was uh, a first year student, the first gay student have. She was lesbian, and her class, this was in a conservative area, were horrified to have a classmate who was lesbian. And they made life so uncomfortable for her that she left after the first semester.
Wow.
And I was deeply disturbed. Um, so I went to the curriculum committee and pointed out that we had nothing, not one word said about sexuality in 4 years of education. And that given what was happening, I thought it was time that we do something. And they said, do you have some ideas? And I said, I know what should be in the curriculum. Yeah. Well, why don't you write it up? So I wrote up a 2-year curriculum, presented it to the curriculum committee, and they said, oh, this is great. When can you start teaching it?
That's where your personality brought a new tone to what was
Yeah.
offered there. That's
So
remarkable.
we started. I started even in the first semester broaching uh, gay topics because the first semester they had patients, in quotes, come in with prepared stories and they were to respond to them. So I made sure that at least a couple of those stories had to do with GLBT or very closely related topics. And then in the second year, uh, I got a whole morning, 4 hours, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, to just on GLBT.
Yeah.
And it went, this, I thought it went very well. The students were extremely unhappy the first couple of years. And the dean was getting a little twitchy about how many complaints he was getting. So I knew the dean of students had a large practice with gay men.
Oh,
So I approached him. Would he do the opening for that whole morning
mm,
and set the tone and give it, quote, legitimacy? You know? um, and he did a wonderful job pointing out that as physicians, they do not have a choice to discriminate. State
powerful.
law in Tennessee requires that you see who comes to your door.
Wow. Pre-
And then the next year, I took it a step further and asked him if he would bring in a panel of some of his patients. So we had a panel of a half dozen gay men up there on the stage. And they introduced themselves. And then um, the students asked questions.
Perfect. Um,
And, and by the time I left, it was working pretty well. The students were beginning to accept for the most part. I wouldn't say all, but for the most part.
wow, that is so wonderful, so powerful.
And we had some real experts that I could call on for help in teaching this, and who also spoke. Um, the guy that wrote literally the medical manual on male transgendering,
Wow.
um, and a couple of other people who were just outstanding.
So you kind of
And so I had a lot of help.
you cracked open some space for others, it sounds like too, so that they were able to have some light come in to their consciousness about.
I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah. Well, we are nearing the end of our time. It goes so fast. It's a 30-minute interview, and of course, that can only be a small snapshot into your human experience, Barbara. I'm curious before we go if you can just briefly describe what is inspiring you now and what is this chapter of your life all about?
This chapter of my life is about creating community for the Jewish residents where I live.
Yeah,
Um, in
beautiful.
terms of services, in terms of celebrations for holidays, um, and in terms of one on one time with many of them,
Beautiful.
and as chaplain.
Barbara, it's such a gift to be with you here and spend some time getting to know you, being touched by your soul, and opening the doorway to sharing some of your message and experience with others. Thank you for joining us on this month's Rainbow Inspirations. This episode was recorded, so it will be played live at the normal time on Wednesday, June 7th at noon. And you're welcome to put your comments into the comment section. So I hope we continue to stay connected, Barbara. And is there any
And I
final?
thank you very much
Oh,
for
mm,
getting me set up, prepared. Yeah.
oh, you are easy. Thank you for being flexible and open. I appreciate you. Okay.